Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We will begin with chapter 24, verse 1. We already discussed yesterday the Ramban. The question was, what is the connection between Avraham's age and the fact that he had Eliezer take an oath regarding finding an appropriate spouse for Yitzchak? So the Ramban's shot yesterday was very interesting, and he basically explained that Avram was concerned that he might pass away before Eliezer's mission was over. And therefore, if Eliezer took an oath, then Avram would be confident that Eliezer would continue the mission, even if Avram was no longer of this world. Just to get another approach, it's related, but with a little bit of a twist. Orach Chaim on Pasuk Aleph, Avraham Zakein. Perish, Litzad Shero Atzmo Zakein, from the fact that he saw himself as being elderly, V'gam Ra Ki Higdil Hashem Lehetiv Imo B'chol Tov, and he saw that God had given him so much good. If you remember in the pasuk, it doesn't just say Avram was older; it says God had blessed him with all of this, with so much good. Chash al ha'eved hamoshel bakol v'roa nechasim merubim v'oish adoniya kol zakein. So he had a little bit of concern about this servant of his, who, as it's also described in the pasuk, he governed over everything that Avram had. He was holding all the strings. The Ramban mentioned yesterday that he was holding all the strings, and the fact that he was holding all the strings brings out the fact that he was holding all the strings brings out the point that Yitzchak would listen to him. The Orach Chaim is saying it in a different way, that the fact that he's holding all the strings, Yachshov machshavos lahasi bito liYitzchak ki yitain b'tov eino. So maybe Eliezer will decide to marry his daughter off to Yitzchak. Eliezer is a person of great power in the household. Avram is getting older. Eliezer sees there are great assets. Amar lo simno yotcha nischakim lashpio b'derech klal halaknani v'oznav tishmana davar ki akol lo kolilav shivato dato. So the Orach Chaim says the oath was all about Eliezer's daughter. That's what the oath was all about. That's what Avram was really concerned about. It's interesting. The Orach Chaim is saying it is more in terms of the assets in Avram's household. The medrash that Rashi cites is just, in general, Eliezer would think it was so exciting for his daughter to be married to Yitzchak. So that's why there's an oath. I want to be very clear, you're not going to marry my son to your daughter, especially because I might not be in the picture for so much longer. But he didn't want to say to him, I want you to swear your daughter won't marry my son. So harsh. So he said, I want you to swear that you won't marry my son off to any Canaanite woman. And that included his daughter. Very, very interesting pshat. Okay, let's go on to verse 3. We read the pasuk, but I just want to make another point or two. So God is, Avram is still speaking to Eliezer, and he says, Vashbiacha ba'Hashem Elokei hashamayim v'Elokei haaretz. I will have you swear by God, the God of the heaven and the God of the earth. That's a dramatic phrase. How about like, I'll have you swear by God, or like the God of the land, the God of the heaven and earth. What's that about? That you shouldn't take a wife for my son from the Canaanite women in the place that I live. Did you really have to tell him in the place that I live? Did Eliezer not know where Avram lived? Also strange. So two very different points. I think just interesting. Sforno and Pasuk Gimel. Elokei hashamayim v'Elokei haaretz, referring to God as the God of the heaven and the God of the earth. Sheim tivgod, if you betray this oath, Yifra mimcha ba'olam hazeh v'olam haba. God will punish you in this world and the next. So that says this Sforno is why it talks about the God of the God of the heaven and the God of the earth. Took a note that if you betray your assurance to me, God will punish you in both worlds. Okay, Kli Yakar on Pasuk Gimel. Lo sikachi shel lifni b'bnos haknani asher anochi yoshev b'kirbo. V'chi adayin lo yadanu sheyoshev b'kirbo. The question we posed: Do we not yet know? Does Eliezer not yet know that Avram lives among the Canaanites? Ela sheba l'taritz b'zeh kushya. Avram is trying to explain and answer an unasked question. V'zeh. Ki mistamat siva shelo yischatem b'bnos haknani Pen Yilma b'Maaseyim. If I were to ask right now, why does Abraham not want his son to be married to a Canaanite woman? So presumably the idea is because he doesn't like their conduct, and he doesn't want his son to be impacted by their conduct. Like the Torah says much later in the Chumash, don't marry these nations, because it's very possible that if your son marries daughters from these nations, it will sway your son away from the service of God. The famous question on this parsha. Avram wants a wife who will have good conduct to marry Yitzchak. Now, how do you know that someone will have good conduct? Well, you can meet them, you can see how they are, and you can assess. But Avram is saying the people of Canaan, forget it. Avram doesn't just tell Eliezer, be really careful and be really thoughtful. He says, Canaan is not an option. So obviously Avram is saying that upbringing is so important to him that he doesn't even want a case-by-case assessment, a person-by-person assessment. Okay, instead, what does Eliezer do? Eliezer goes and finds the daughter. Avram didn't tell him to specifically find that family or that specific branch of the family, but Eliezer finds the daughter of the family of Lavan and Besuel, okay, who become famous for all generations as being dishonest crooks. That's where Eliezer should go. What? That, again, Rivka is tremendous, but if you're talking about the family, why is this family any better than that family? Guess what? Rivka's family did idol worship. Okay, therefore, says Abraham, Omar, he says, Asher Anochi Yoshev B'kirbo. Avram explains the problem. He's not helping Eliezer figure out where he lives. He says, the reason why I don't want my son to marry a Canaanite woman is because I live in that area. The Omar Pentashiv Espeni Shama. And maybe because of the proximity, my daughter-in-law will impact my son. Ki Omar Pshita, Im Yesa B'ni Isha B'nos HaKnani Me'achar Shanochi Yoshev B'kirbo Mistama Gam B'ni Yagor Etzlam. This is our home base. If Yitzchak marries a local, it's distinctly possible that he's going to be spending a lot of time with his in-law family. V'im Yisam Mibnos Lavan Upsuel V'Yidor Etzlam Oz Yesh Gam Kein Lachos Shemel Yomod B'Maaseyim. Now look, if Eliezer would marry who ended up being Rivka and would live in Lavan and Besuel's neighborhood, that would also be very concerning to Avram. Aval Kushiyisa Isha Misham V'Yidor Khan. But if he marries a woman from out of town, everybody knows the out of town people are much better than whatever. If he marries a woman from out of town, but he stays with me, then I don't have to be worried. He won't live with the in-law family. He won't be impacted by them. He won't be impacted by the Canaanites in the region. He won't have a reason to bond with them because his wife is not from their family. They'll be resentful of him because he didn't want to marry their daughter. Well, let's hold here, but it's a very interesting, it's a very important shot in the Kli Yakar. Numerous Mefarshim say something similar to this in one way or another. You could certainly understand now Avraham's adamant position that they should come, and the daughter has to live in Avraham's community. Remember, Eliezer asked him, what happens if she doesn't want to come? If she doesn't want to come, Avram says, so then forget it. Because it's all about someone from there has to come here. An interesting shot. Okay, let's go on to verse 8. Avram is still talking, V'imlo soveh ha'isha loleches acharecha, what we actually were just speaking about a moment ago. And if the woman does not, you find the right woman, and if she decides she doesn't want to come with you, v'nikisam shvuas izos, then you're absolved of this oath. Rak espeni lo sashev shama. But just Avram emphasizes, don't bring my son there. What does it mean you're absolved of the oath? Now what? Eliezer finds the right person. She refuses to come. What happens now? So Avram says you're absolved of the oath. So he goes home. So he does something else. What should he do? Ramban on Pasuk Ches. He starts off by citing Rashi. Lo hirsha oso lo kachas lo isha mibnos Canaan. He didn't empower him to choose a wife from the daughters of Canaan. Avo sheyehu pater v'Hashem atov beinav yaseh. So he starts off by saying, you know what it means? You're absolved of the vow or of the oath. If she doesn't want to come with you, finish the project. You're done. Don't do anything else. It'll be God's department. This was my hishtadlus. This was my effort. I have an idea of what I want and what I don't want. And if it doesn't work out, just don't do anything. V'Rashi kasav v'kachlo. Sorry, that's what the Ramban says. The Ramban says, just don't do anything. V'Rashi kasav v'kachlo misham bibnos aner eshkol umamrei. Rashi says there's a plan B. Rashi says that he should find for him a wife from the daughters of Aner, Eshkol, and Mamre. These were these people that had somewhat of an alliance with Avram. So the Ramban says, Vim Kananim heim Chalilalo. If these people who had an alliance with Avram were Canaanites, then heaven forbid, that's the whole point. Avram didn't want that. Ube'emes shehem mizera Canaan. And he actually says to Ramban, if you do your research, you'll find they were Canaanites. Ramban says, I can't fathom after this whole speech, he doesn't want anybody from Canaan. Why would you say that Avram means that if you can't find someone from out of town, then yeah, marry one of the local Canaanites just from these specific people. Skipping ahead about 5 lines and minus the next paragraph, the Ramban says, Aval v'nikisa mishvuasi sheyehu pater. What it means you're absolved of the vow is that you're exempt. For Avraham, who hayodeya b'Yitzchak hatzadik, sheyishma if Avram had confidence that his son Yitzchak would listen closely to the instructions that Avram gave Eliezer, v'sheyizor bohem, and that Yitzchak would be diligent about them. V'yelech lo el Yishmoel, o lelot, v'yeser ho'amim, and that Yitzchak would find someone from another branch of the family, maybe from Yishmoel's family, maybe from Lot's family, maybe from other nations, but the point is not someone from Canaan. So that's an interesting dispute between Rashi and the Ramban. So we discussed this morning the Orach Chaim's explanation as to why Avram had Eliezer take a vow. We discussed the Sforno as to why God is referred to as the God of heaven and God of the earth. We discussed the Kli Yakar as to why it was so important to Avram that he not marry a Canaanite woman. And we discussed Rashi and the Ramban regarding what is Plan B.